American citizens, by the way. Sorry, Russian citizens in the United States. It's just unbelievable. He's still there, no problem. And this is why I'm shooting videos like this, man. And this is why all through the Trump propaganda bullshit that CNN and all these other crazy people were talking about, this is the reason I stood against it. Now, I did not predict this. I just know that when you lie to the degree that CNN and MSNBC et al. Were obviously lying, that this would create a bad eventuality. We've got Sadie on the line. Go ahead, Sadie. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. Go for it.
I just, I think that part of the biggest issue that I have is that people are now suddenly like, oh my God. And this has been going on in the Ukraine and Russia and all of what were the former Soviet bloc nations for a really long time. And you
So
have people who think that NATO is terrible,
when you
but
say
NATO is
this, you say
the
this
content.
has been going on. Just give us. Let's say we didn't know anything at all. Give us in 2 minutes what this means.
Okay, this means that Russia, especially under Putin, has had that Putin himself. I'm not even blaming the Russian people. I don't blame the Russian people because I have plenty of friends from Russia and I know how it is to live in Russia from them. It is like it's terrible. I mean, like really they have a shit life and they have been struggling far beyond the sanctions for a lot longer than that.
Do you
But
attribute
NATO,
that? Do you attribute that all to Putin?
I attribute it to the fact that Russia, even going back into the Soviet Union, Russia was incredibly utilitarian. And then when Russia fell, what ended up happening was that the country was carved up and run by gangs. It was mostly carved up and run by gangs, and the criminal enterprise within Russia was horrific. And then Putin came in and he consolidated. But as I said, Putin is KGB, and his desire is basically to return to the Soviet state. That's his drive, and always has been. And my biggest issue is that now everybody is like, "Oh my God, Russia, Ukraine," and there's this like divide of people who some of them understand who Putin is and how bad he is, and then there are other people who seem to have been sleepwalked into believing that Putin isn't a problem, like that he's not a terrible person who has killed journalists, who's killed opposition, who killed the man who was essentially his mentor. Like,
Haven't the Ukrainians killed a bunch of Russian nationalists over there in Donbass?
oh, absolutely. I'm not saying that they didn't. I'm not sitting here saying that the Ukraine is innocent. I mean, nobody in this situation is innocent, but I believe that the Ukraine has the right to be a sovereign nation. And I don't think that Russia has the right to say, I'm going to re-envelop you back if the Ukraine government and the Ukrainian people don't want that. If the
Well,
Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people decide, which goes back to the whole 2014 thing and um, the Euromaidan protests, they wanted to be part of the EU. That is the reason why the whole thing went up like a Roman candle,
okay,
because it was what is it?
yeah.
Yanchenko was the president of the country at the time, and he was basically Putin's puppet. That's the reason why after 2014 revolt, he had to be taken back to Russia.
Okay,
He went running back to Russia and to hide.
let me
And go ahead,
let,
you can read whatever you want.
okay. And I want you to interact with this.
Hmm.
For the Kremlin, the notion that Ukraine, a pillar of the Soviet Union with strong historic ties to Russia, would join NATO was a red line. I'm quoting now, no Russian leader could stand idly by in the face of steps toward NATO membership for Ukraine. That would be a hostile act toward Russia. Putin warned
Mhm.
U.S. Undersecretary for Political Affairs William Burns, who is now director of the CIA, in the weeks leading up to NATO's 2008 Bucharest summit. And I'm sure that you read um, Burns's response that was leaked with via WikiLeaks, where he agreed that NATO had a deleterious psychological, and he even went as far as to say neurological effect on Russian people. So Burns was saying this. He was the director of this. He now director of CIA, but he was an ambassador at the time. Burns
Mhm.
was saying this in 2008 that this would be interpreted as a hostile act toward Russia. Can
Uh-huh.
you see how Russians would
Uh-huh.
interpret Ukrainians going to joining NATO as a hostile act against them?
I think that basically what it comes down to is, do you believe that the Ukraine has a right to be a sovereign nation?
I will answer that question after you answer mine because I asked you first.
Okay, do I think that Russia doesn't want the Ukraine to be part of NATO, and do I think that
No,
that's going to get
no.
GBGB?
The question I asked you was, can you see how Russians would interpret, especially considering the actions since 2014? Could you see how Russians could interpret Ukraine joining NATO as a hostile act toward them?
I don't I like do I understand that that's what he said? Yeah, that's what he said. Do I understand
No,
why
that's
he
not
said it?
Sadie. That's not my question.
I
I don't
no,
care about Putin. I'm talking about Russia as a whole
I
now.
didn't say anything about Putin. I was talking about the director of the CIA and his a summary of the fact that that Russia would take it as a
Yeah, but sis,
psychological
that's not even
affront.
the question. That's not even the question. Here's a specific question I am asking you. Can you
Uh-huh.
see how Russia as a whole would interpret Ukraine joining NATO as a hostile act toward them? That's my question.
No, I don't understand why they would see it that way. I don't.
You have no idea.
No, I
Okay, now
honestly
ask me your question.
don't. Okay, is does the Ukraine have a right to be a sovereign nation?
Ukraine absolutely has a right to be a sovereign nation, and Russia has the right to defend itself. And just like we invaded Iraq under the premise that they were weapons of mass destruction and that Iraq was a hostile state, and just like we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cubans had the complete sovereignty to do whatever they wanted. But as we know with human nature, when people feel threatened, things like that are going to happen. To me, it is a.
Okay, okay, I'm gonna stop you. Okay, I'm
Sure,
gonna stop you. And
sure,
I'm going to break this down to a personal level, okay?
sure.
The Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union, correct?
Yep.
Okay, the Soviet Union was bad, correct?
Bad in what way?
Bad in the way that it treated its people, bad in the way that it utilized people as, commodities, and that everything was very utilitarian. They
Like in
didn't allow
America?
religion. They didn't allow religion. They didn't allow people to choose their own course of action. They were assigned what it was that they were going to study for and what their jobs were going to be.
I mean, that.
You Mr. Pro Life. I mean, in the Soviet Union, there was abortion clinics everywhere because they thought that they should only have so many children.
Yeah, Sadie. What I'll say is that the I as
I mean,
an
is that bad?
I as
Are
an
those
American, I as an American have a hard time condemning any nation. What I will say is that the Soviet Union, on the scale of badness, is worse than America is right now to a degree.
okay?
The hell that I've personally seen America has brought to people all over the world.
Okay, that's not what we're talking about right now.
Well, well,
That's not what I'm talking about
let me
right
try
now.
to explain to you
So
why I'm
I'm
answering
bringing
your
it.
question.
No, I'm bringing it back to what I'm saying.
Well,
Okay, the Ukraine
you're
used to
asking me a
be part of
question. I'm trying to answer it.
the Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union.
Well,
When
you
the
asked me if the
Soviet Union
Soviet
does,
Union was bad. That's the question you asked me.
yeah, and I'm not talking about what isms. I'm not comparing it to the US. I'm saying, do you think the
Well,
Soviet
bad is
Union
obviously a comparative term, right? Because we're comparing it to good.
mm,
So it's
now
inherently
we're using duality?
no, it's inherently a comparative term, right? When you say something is bad. So what I'm saying
Uh
is what I'm saying
but
is
by your theological explanations, you don't have to know bad to know good. So you're now going to use duality when I'm just
well, no,
asking,
I'm using
running down what the Soviet Union was
well, sis, hold
and
on.
what this.
I'm using that because you don't accept my theology. If you wanted my theology, I could tell you plainly that Russia as well as America, I don't see as very far away from each other as far as scale of badness goes. I'm
Okay.
just telling you the God's honest truth.
Okay, well, the God's honest truth is knowing people that lived under communist Russia, like the Soviet Union, and know people who escaped it. I can assure you that what we go through in the United States, and I know that we have a lot of debacles, is nothing compared to what they lived under.
Do you know anyone from
So
Yemen?
I do know people from Yemen, and I know people from Ethiopia.
Okay,
I
so
I,
so
I
when a
know people
mother's
from
so you know what's
I
happening in Yemen.
yes, I am very aware of what's happening in Yemen. I also know people from Ghana and people from Somalia. I know people from all over, and I'm not saying that I'm not aware of the U.S. and the things that the U.S. does. I'm not talking about that right now. What I'm talking about is the fact that when the Soviet Union fell and the Eastern Bloc nations were created, those countries became sovereign nations. And basically, what it comes down to is, does the Ukraine have the right to make the decisions for themselves as to what they want to do?
What is
Because
NATO?
if they do, NATO was created in 1947 to, after World War II, to try to protect countries from the growth of the Soviet Union so that it didn't push into Western Europe,
Okay,
and to make sure that, what happened in Germany was never going to happen again. That
and
is the basis of NATO. That is the reason why NATO was created.
okay, and Russia has always interpreted that as a hostile alliance. Isn't that true?
Oh, hell yeah.
And didn't we tell them in the early '90s that we would not move 1 inch eastward? Didn't we tell them
I
that?
I yeah, I'm not disputing that either. I'm not
But why
disputing the
would we
fact
tell
that there
them
has
that?
been, we told them that to try to maintain peace.
How come? Why would peace be contingent on us not moving an inch eastward?
It was contingent at the time. Now,
Why?
if you
I'm
want to if
asking
you
you
want to go,
why.
because they were trying to reconvene and try to figure out where everything was going to stand. They had the nations that were falling and becoming independent states. And so they did not want the West to infringe on them. And I get it. I'm not saying that that didn't happen. I'm not saying that it wasn't made for peace in the 90s. Okay, that's
Yeah,
the
but you just
90s.
contradicted your earlier statement though.
How so?
Because I asked you if it was rational for the Russians to interpret Ukraine going into NATO as hostile to them when you just said
So
that
are you saying that we should live under old treaties indefinitely?
no, what
Should
I'm
we
saying
maintain
is
every treaty that's ever been made?
is that
Like,
a question?
yeah.
Yeah, the answer to that is very simple. We should look at what's happening in the modern zeitgeist. And what's happening in the modern zeitgeist is that Russia has already demonstrated with their actions in Georgia and Crimea that they're willing to follow through on those threats. And there is no reason for Ukraine to join NATO other than a hostile affect toward Russia, which it's clear everybody who studied that region.
They don't want Russian influence. They want to
Who is
be
they? The people in
the
Donbass?
Ukrainians. The Ukrainian government and the majority of Ukrainian people do not want to be a shadow of Russia. They want to be their own nation.
Like the people in Donbass? Is that why they killed 14,000 of them?
Crimea and Donbass, which are far east,
I mean, they burned them alive, right?
supposedly, yeah, that's what they say.
What do you mean supposedly? I mean, this is uncontested fact.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit more complicated than that, and I'm
A
running out of
little more
time.
complicated. Have you ever seen someone
Yeah, it
burned
was.
alive?
Yeah, actually, I have.
That's a pretty
It's
terrible thing,
horrific.
right?
It's kind of horrific.
Isn't it true that a lot of these folks in the Azov battalion are Nazis?
That is true.
Okay.
I'm
So,
not disputing that either.
so these folks have already demonstrated that they're hostile toward Russia and Russian nationals in their own country. And the Russians, it's irrational for Russia to believe that them joining NATO and having access to German munitions and American munitions, that's irrational for them to interpret that as a hostile action.
What I'm saying is
Can you
that
just
a
answer that
sovereign
one question right
nation,
there?
Do they? Is it? No, because at the bottom line, the Ukraine isn't going to do anything to push into Russia, and neither is NATO.
How do the Russians
None,
know that?
none, because geopolitical history states that nobody is going to purposely go into Russia. That was never the intention of NATO. NATO's intention is to protect the Western countries from having Russia impede into them.
Didn't we tell
NATO
didn't we tell
NATO
the
was
Russians
never
that our
created.
intention didn't we tell the Russians that our intention was to not move 1 inch eastward? Didn't we tell them
Yeah,
that?
but nations have the right to make decisions to themselves.
So we're allowed to violate our word 14 times. So then why should the Russians believe anything we have to say about our intentions
We're
there then?
not controlling those countries.
Yeah,
We're
but
not controlling those countries. We don't control NATO. The United States isn't going
the
into
US
any.
doesn't control NATO?
No, the US it doesn't control NATO. NATO is made up of, like, what is it now? 30,
So
30
then
different
on what
countries.
authority did we tell the Gorbachev that we were not going to go 1 inch eastward in NATO then?
Because we were talking about our military installations.
We said we were not going to expand NATO one
We
inch
were
eastward.
we were talking about our own military installations.
No, we didn't say
And
America. We said NATO. That was the deal
again,
with Gorbachev.
again, that was the deal with Gorbachev. Are you going to go back and say that every single treaty that's ever been made has to be honored?
Well, my point is, it's rational for Russians to not trust NATO or the U.S. or any country
And it's completely
expanding there, right?
it's completely rational for NATO to not trust Russia.
Yeah, but Russia hasn't displayed any hostile actions toward NATO. As a matter of fact, isn't it true that
Russia
Gorbachev, hold on,
Russia
hold on, Sadie, didn't Gorbachev follow through on his deal with us when we said that? He let the
Yeah,
Berlin Wall down, right?
Gorbachev was an entirely different creature than Putin.
Right. So he followed through on his promise, but we didn't follow through on ours, right?
He followed through with his, and then geopolitics took over and nations were established and they have the right to make decisions for themselves.
The nations
Russia
were already
has
established at that point, though.
Russia, well, I mean, if you look at the Ukrainian constitution, it's constantly been in flux.
Right.
I
The
mean,
one
it's
that
been in flux
changed
since
on
it's been
7th
in flux
February
since 1991.
2019, where
It's
they
been in
voted.
flux since 1991.
Okay. So it is rational for the Russians then to have a concern about Ukraine joining NATO as a hostile action toward them.
No, it's not a hostile action towards them. It's a protective. If you go, I'm going to go back to my
Okay.
initial analogy to this. The Soviet Union, not a great thing. Now, you had when it dissolved, you had the different countries that created their own sovereign nations. And Georgia, I think what it was, when did Georgia join NATO? It was Georgia, was it Georgia? I can't talk right now.
No,
And then
you're right. I'm looking up
Latvia.
the exact date, but they did.
And was it Latvia? I'm not,
Latvia.
no, Latvia, that's it.
Only reason I
Joined.
know Latvia is because Sori did a mission trip there. That's all.
Okay, so
13
they
years
joined.
ago, 14 years ago, Georgia joined NATO. So you're right on that.
Right. And these countries basically decided to join NATO because they felt that it was in their best interest to protect themselves from the encroachment of Russia. I mean, that's basically why they did it. And that's basically the reason why the Ukraine does it. And I'm not even saying that the Ukraine is innocent or some, perfect angel of a country. I'm not
Wait,
saying that there
who
aren't.
was joining NATO to stop the encroachment of Russia? You said
Georgia.
Georgia. What had the Russians done to demonstrate 14 years ago that they were going to impede on Georgia?
There was Russian military action in Georgia, and I can't remember what the date is.
That was well after 14 years ago. Same with Crimea.
See, the Crimea, I'm the first one to admit.
So the
Again,
Georgian and Crimean invasions happened post NATO
right.
for Georgia.
Well, yeah, they happened post NATO, but there were reasons why Georgia wanted to join ahead of the curve, thinking that it was going to protect them.
So prior to that, what specific actions had the Russians done to justify that?
Basically, okay, I'm going back to my fucking analogy then.
Okay.
I'm going back to the fucking analogy.
Okay.
All right. If you are a woman who is being abused by your husband. Okay. You get away from that husband
Mm-hmm.
and you establish yourself as your own person.
Mm-hmm.
But your husband is like, and you find people who are willing to protect you, a support network.
Yeah.
And then your husband is like, I don't like that. You can't have these people supporting you because I feel threatened.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Does that mean that the wife should be like, oh, you're right, I should give up my support network because this is what makes my ex-husband who was beating the crap out of me feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. That's a terrible argument on the husband's part.
I mean, do you understand, like, breaking it down to an easy personal analogy?
The problem, sister, is that your analogy doesn't work. You killed 14,000 of your husband. You burned your husband alive. And on top of that, you have a nation that's obviously hostile to you that's arming you. Trump was arming Zelensky as recently as 2019. So this is not some destitute woman who's by herself. And listen, that analogy works with me because my mother was in that situation for many years. So
I mean,
that
it's
analogy doesn't work.
basically except it does. It does. The Ukraine
Only if you
wants to
ignore
be,
the 14,000 KIA and the burned people alive who you don't seem to have much of a problem with.
well, I mean, is it terrible? Absolutely. But
You didn't seem that concerned.
does that somehow give Russia a right to go into the Ukraine?
It gives Russia logical justification to perceive them joining NATO as a hostile action. Absolutely. 14,000 dead. Yeah. And us speaking for NATO saying we were not going to go an inch eastward and violating that, and the United States handpicking who Ukraine was going to have as leadership right after that, and then having Joe Biden come down.
Which is ironic because we're
just
very,
give me two
very,
seconds. Give me 2 seconds. That does
you're
not
very
comport.
hyped.
That
You're
does
very
not.
hyped on the idea that the United States is using the Ukraine as a puppet, but
Well, so are the
completely
Russians.
ignoring the history of the fact that the Russians have used the Ukraine as a puppet,
I'm not.
Since like 91.
No. You're misinterpreting what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it is rational for them to have severe distrust of the Ukrainians, considering they've been a vassal nation of the United States at least since 2014. I mean,
right, because they're pissed off that it's no longer a vassal nation for them.
no, because
So
for the last 5 years, the United States media has been putting out anti-Russia Russophobia horribleness for the last 5 years.
Oh,
That would be a concern. Did you see that tweet
well,
that I
so
posted?
basically what it comes down to
Sadie,
is
did you
that
see that tweet that I posted?
up until 2014, I can't see anything because I'm talking to you and my battery is about to go dead. So if I die, if I duck out, that's what happened. My battery is dead.
Well, yeah, everybody sees that you're a more than capable debater. So everybody knows that. But go ahead. I'll say what you have to say, and then I'm going to read to you a tweet because I think it's illuminating.
No, go ahead and read the tweet.
Expel all the Russian students studying in the United States. Close the Russian embassy in Washington. Expel the diplomats. Seize all property, buildings, homes, apartments owned by Russian citizens in the United States. Now, let's say we're at war with Iraq, right? And you saw a tweet like this. Wouldn't you say that that's a really racist, horrible thing to say about an Iraqi person?
And I think that the idea of going through and weeding out Russians in the U.S. is ridiculous, and it goes back to the Red Scare, which is like beyond stupidity.
Right, but that's all our media has been pumping out, Sadie, for the last 5 years about Russia.
No, I have never seen people say that we should get rid of Russian people who have moved here.
Sadie, did you not watch MSNBC for the last 5 years where they were talking about how Russia was going to freeze us out? Well, you should. What I'm saying is I think Russians...
Why would I watch that? Why would I watch that? It's crap.
It would help you understand why Russia would be justified in being very concerned that America has that kind of influence.
Do you watch Sputnik? Do you watch Sputnik?
But do you understand why I'm saying what I'm saying?
Do you watch Sputnik?
No, Russia
right, I understand what you're saying. But
okay, say back to me why I'm saying it.
Because you're telling me that I should watch MSNBC because
no, I'm not saying you should watch. No. But here's why I'm saying that's important. For the last 5 years, our American media has been putting out Russophobic, to your point, Red Scare bullshit for the last 5 years. When I was doing reporting on the whole Russiagate nonsense, I had Russian citizens of America telling me, thank you for saying this because everybody's looking at us like we're crazy and we're traitors to our country. So what I'm saying is, when you have a client state like Ukraine, that is a client state of a hostile actor like America, I think they have a right to be very, very concerned. And the idea that it's irrational for them to be concerned about an America, Ukraine, NATO alliance, to me, just doesn't take into account what Russians have been dealing with in the last 5 years.
Okay, well, number one, I don't watch MSNBC. I do not get any of my news from American news sources. I don't watch
Okay.
CNN. I don't watch MSNBC. I don't watch Fox. I just don't, because the American news cycle is nonsense.
Sure.
And I just don't have a tolerance for it.
Sure.
If I get my news from, the BBC, I also get a lot of my news from Al Jazeera.
Yeah.
So I get my news from a Chinese news source and from an Indian news source.
Mm-hmm.
I don't look at anything in the United States because it's crap.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess if people aren't smart enough to understand that it's crap and that they need to go to, the closest thing to an American news source that I read is the Associated Press and Reuters.
Sure. But my point is, if you are and I'm sure you know this, but if you're in an intelligence service or a defense service, one of the first things you do is watch popular news of the country that you're observing.
I understand that, but
if you're seeing 5 years of this Russophobic language, and then you look at social media and it's once again more Russophobic language, then
okay, but
wouldn't it be rational to be concerned of this client relationship with a country that's clearly hostile to you? Isn't that a rational concern?
I guess I don't look at it that way because do you watch, do you have any access to Russian state media?
No.
Okay.
I'm sure I have access to it, but they're not a superpower, right? We've got 100 times the economy as them. They can't, I'm not concerned that they can harm me.
Okay. Well, my thought on it is knowing actually paying attention to what's pumped out by the Russian state media, the propaganda of it is through the roof. And what they're telling Russians is that Russia is a superpower and that the rest of the world is terrified of Russia and that the Americans are weak and that, you should take some time and actually not educate yourself, but actually familiarize yourself is what I'm saying.
Sadie, I have no problem with saying I'm ignorant about Russian geopolitics.
I
have no issue with that. My problem is that you stating that it's irrational for Russia to feel threatened by a Ukraine going into NATO. The analogy that you gave, where you have this abused woman who's finally going on her own and now people are supporting her, and then ignoring the fact they've murdered 14,000 Russian nationals. They changed the language from Ukrainian to Russian to only Ukraine. They burned people alive. Your analogy of Ukraine as this hapless abused woman just doesn't work.
I just want you to know my phone is about to go dead because it's crackling at me.
Sure.
No,
let me give you the last word then, so that we can put a bow on this, so you don't suddenly disappear. So I'm just gonna shut up and kind of summarize your thought process, so that we can land the plane before your phone dies.
My thought process is that unfortunately at this point Ukraine has kind of become Poland. Poland used to be fought over constantly. Russia was pretty comfortable with having Ukraine exist as its puppet. That is the reason why what is his name? Yanchukovych. I'm butchering it. The president that was in office during 2014 had to go back to Russia. He was there because of Russia. Had to go back to Russia because he was ousted. Because at that time, the Euromaidan revolts were happening, and the Ukraine wanted to join EU. Now, see, and that's the whole thing. Initially, it was just the desire to join the EU. NATO has just recently become an issue. The initial issue in 2014 was joining the EU. And then after that, it became a matter of NATO. But the bottom line is you have a country, and now you have these people that are like, the United States is in there, and Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and all of that nonsense. Is it is it happening? I don't know. I'm incredibly skeptical of this
Well, Hunter
idea
Biden
somehow that
was on the board of Burisma.
okay, but the thing about it is that what Burisma was actually being investigated for happened long before Hunter Biden was ever involved. And the prosecutor that everybody freaks out about, how Joe Biden went in there and blackmailed them to get rid of him, that was because the EU and the European banks basically came to the US and they're like, you have to get rid of this guy. This guy is dirty. We need him gone. And so Biden went in there. It wasn't like Biden just went in there of his own accord and was like, I'm going to get rid of this guy.
Well, that,
He
that
was sent in
demonstrates
there
that
by
they don't have their own
Euro banks.
sovereignty, though, right? Because one guy can go in there and blackmail them to the tune of 2 billion USD, and they fell in line.
No, they were sent in there by the Euro bank because of the way that they were not addressing corruption.
Either way, they're not functioning with complete autonomy, right?
Okay, do they have autonomy? No, they seem to be a puppet from one person or another. So should we allow Putin to make them a puppet of his, or should NATO say, okay?
Well, when they're killing 14,000, okay. So that was the great Sadie. She did an excellent job. Obviously, she's a force to be reckoned with intellectually. I just think I think she made a lot of good points. I just disagree with and I actually think the Ukrainians would disagree with the presentation of them as an abused woman who's finally going out by herself, and then Russia as the overbearing abused husband. As a kid who witnessed what that is actually like firsthand, believe me, we didn't have our own army of stormtroopers that would go and kill people to the tune of 14,000, however that analogy would work, burn people alive, behead them, send the heads over to their mothers, all types of stuff. I just don't believe that Ukraine was that kind of an actor on the world stage prior to them joining NATO. I do think I do think that she has a point about national sovereignty that I think you have to contend with. You have to contend with that. It's not as simple as people would like to make it. My issue is there's national sovereignty, which is something that has to be accounted for, and then there's also human nature. And as I said in the previous video, where I'm from, they told you if you ever take out a gun or a box cutter, use that shit. Because if you pull out a gun and threaten someone, they're gonna kill you. So one way or another, somebody's gonna die. And like I said, we went into the war with Iraq on the premise of weapons of mass destruction. And obviously there were no WMDs, but even the argument there are no WMDs betrays something. Namely, if there were WMDs, then that would have justified the invasion of Iraq. Why? Well, we had a war with them in the early in Kuwait, and so because of that, they were a hostile nation. And so if a hostile nation has WMDs, then we had the right to go in there and invade them. The UN wasn't saying, look, they're a sovereign nation, so even if they do have WMDs, you have no right to invade them. What the UN was telling us was, hold on, we don't have any proof that they have WMDs. If Ukraine actually joined NATO, they would literally in broad daylight have WMDs. They'd have ICBMs, all types of craziness. And so the major point of contention for me with my sister was this idea that it is irrational for Russia to be threatened or feel threatened by a NATO alliance. I just think that that's where I have to disagree. I also think it's significant that I also think it's significant the way that Russian nationals were treated by the Ukrainian government and the fact that America had clearly made them a client state. I think all of those factors put together makes it clear that Russia had a logical justification, not a moral one, and I don't even think a strategic one, but a logical justification to feel threatened and then to act accordingly. But that's the entire point of Middle America, ladies and gentlemen. We're not always supposed to agree. Sadie's her own woman with her own thoughts, obviously, and that's how we do debates here. And hopefully, guys, her point was well stated and well represented in that there wasn't too much over talk and that she got fair time. I hope people feel that way. I hope people feel that way. Okay, guys. That was a good one. That was a barn burner. I really did appreciate that discussion. I hope to have more of these. I hope to have have this be a call-in show. I think that makes for better programming, to be honest with you, because that way it helps. With my lack of understanding of a lot of these topics, people can come in and fill in the blanks. And I agree with Alec. Iraq was an abused wife, and we had to liberate her from Saddam by killing 1.5 million of her children, I guess. Glad you're making. Yeah, Ben. Hopefully, I can find a way to get you and the great Izzy to come back on the Facebook forum, inshallah. But we will continue to report about this stuff, guys, and we will continue to have these discussions, because I think they're very, very important. I just wonder why people aren't talking about. Speaking of a channel I missed, Sori and I were looking at Uncle Dan's Bipolar Ram, your channel before, bro. I thought you had a pretty unique voice, but I understand. Trust me, more than anybody, the how tough it is to have a consistent YouTube channel, especially a channel that's speaking as close to the heart as you were. So yeah, what are your thoughts, Dan, on what was going on there? Okay, guys. I think I'm gonna land the plane. Alec, it's good to have you on. You had some really, really good. Alec is kind of, being an evangelical. A lot of the stuff about evolution and science and things like that. It was really cool to have Alec around because I could say, "Hey, man, what about this mean? What about this? What about that?" And he would explain it to me in a way that I could understand. So it's really cool having Alec as a friend. It's good to have him here as well. So a lot of old school heads that I'm very, 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 very happy we're around. Rod does make a good point. If Donbass wants to be part of Russia, why didn't Putin just go to Donbass? Why did he go west? That's a very good point. Why go to Kiev, etc., etc.? Good point. I think what he wants to do is get rid of Zelensky, but I think that's a really, really big ask. Shout out to Vin and Sori, even though she is missing, and shout out to the Convo Couch. Yeah. It looks a little different here when you have 1,000 kilometers shared border with Russia, history of Russia oppressing our people, trying to invade us for no reason. Yeah, Kai, I bet. I bet it's a completely different experience watching it from your vantage point. For sure. From my vantage point, I'm looking at this as an American, and I'm looking at it like my government lied me into multiple wars, and it tastes like Iraq to me with the rhetoric and all the rest of it. And so that's how I'm coming at it, for sure. All right, Applejack. Good to see you, buddy. Always coming with the research. I appreciate y'all. What's the Convo Couch? I think the Convo Couch is the comment section. but it's a much cooler way of saying the comment section. Obviously, saying Convo Couch is much cooler than the comment section. Much cooler. I think everybody would have to agree with that. All right, guys, I am going to... Candy Apple, send me an email. Did you get your shirt yet, by the way? Because I haven't gotten a receipt from our distributor yet. So send me an email about that, because we owe you a shirt. Convo Couch is a YouTube show. Yes, it is a YouTube show. China will try to invade Taiwan in the next 3 months. Well, I hope not. I'll pray not. But if they do, we will be reporting on it. Unfortunately, if that happens. No, I didn't forget about it. Send me an email, sis. I'll get sorry on it. I'm always horrible with this stuff. Also, there was one more thing I wanted. Oh, guys, I'm gonna chop up the actual debate with Sadie, so that you guys don't have to watch the entire, like, this, because this stream was an hour and a half. I'm gonna chop up the debate so you guys will just watch me and Sadie go at it. So you'll just have that segment. That'll be coming up pretty soon. I won't leave the chair until I've got that video edited. Okay. So we'll have that in there so that you can watch the debate. Why don't you reach out to Jackson H? Whoa, Michael Smith, bro, you're about to get yourself banned, man. you're about to get yourself banned. I understand that you want attention, but that's not the way to do it. She didn't hide behind a keyboard. Credit to her. So we're gonna cut that so that just we can have that debate so people can watch it in its entirety from start to finish. Kai, I've got to edit this video right after, so it's gonna take me a while. So I'm not sure, but after that we'll have it done. I'm streaming from the Middle America page, Delaney, but I really don't think you should be on it. I really don't think you should be on it. So there you go. Try beat independent. Yeah, I mean, shout out to Jackson Hinkle. Shout out to him. He's doing good work on that. I think we showed his video in the previous video before the CIA shut us down. But all right, guys, I gotta get out of here. Thank you to everybody, and obviously big shout out to Sadie Bear for show. Then out, guys. In the meantime, love your neighbor, take care of each other. Middle America, we are the media. Till next time, guys.